Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
I got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 816. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about castles and mountains, horses and mountain biking, a lead mine, and a coal mine as we go to Eastern Slovenia.
I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Let's talk about Slovenia. I'd like to welcome back to the show Mark Baker from markbakerprague.com. But Mark has not come to talk to us about Prague this time, but Koroško, Slovenia. Mark, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And I say welcome back. Mark has been on the show a couple of times at least. One talking about the Volga that I quite remember, and I don't remember the other one.
I don't remember the other one either, but it might have been the Czech Republic.
Could very well have been where Mark lived.
Yeah, but I remember the Volga River, how to cruise during Russia very well, actually. That was a pretty good discussion.
Excellent. And Koroško is not a place I know. Slovenia I've been to, but where are we talking about?
It's even Slovenians they would know it, of course. It's a rather small country and people, obviously, they know the geography, but it's not a place that even Slovenians would necessarily go to. It's a very small province in the northern part of the country, in the middle of the country, right on the border with Austria.
Excellent. And why should someone go to Koroško?
That's a really good question, but I'll tell you one reason that you should go, and that's to explore this lead mine that I went to in June. I had no idea that it was there, but it was an incredible experience.
Interesting. We'll get more into that when we talk about the detailed itinerary, but what itinerary are you going to recommend for us?
I recently was in Slovenia at the invitation of the Slovenian Tourist Board. They had me in there to tour around some of the lesser visited parts of Slovenia. Obviously, the country of Slovenia is well known for Lake Bled, for the Julian Alps, for part of the coast along the Adriatic, for the capital, for the caves.
And
But at least up until COVID, those areas had become very popular with visitors, Americans, Europeans, Slovenians. And they want to introduce visitors to other parts of the country that are less well known. And that was the purpose of my trip there in June.
although still think a lot of Americans haven't really discovered Slovenia as it deserves.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. But these areas, Slovenia is a very small country, and the
Hmm.
areas that they consider to be the real jewels of Slovenia, like Lake Bled, for example, or even the capital, are small places. They don't cope well with large groups, certainly not group
Got it.
tourism, but also large numbers of tourists. And what they say is, and which many countries are saying, is look, our country has got a lot more to offer than just the things that everybody knows, and we want people to see
Sure.
the other things. And that's where Koroshko and some of the other places I visited in June come into the conversation.
Okay. Where are we going to start for this itinerary?
Let's talk about the main event, okay? I don't know if there's an itinerary per se. For my itinerary to get to Koroshko, we actually started in the eastern part of Slovenia, in the city of Maribor. Actually,
Okay.
what started there? Let me just tell you about that trip a little bit. I'm sure a lot of your listeners are not familiar with Maribor, and then some of the other places in eastern Slovenia, and then we'll get to Koroshka more in a few minutes, more into the conversation, if that's okay.
Sure.
Yeah, okay. Part of this trip that they put me on is to explore eastern Slovenia. Most of the things that we talked about that are well known in part of Slovenia are in the western part of the country. This is the Lake Bled, Lake Bohinj, Ljubljana. But the eastern part of Slovenia, and when I say eastern part of Slovenia, I'm only talking about something that's maybe 60 to 80, 100 miles away, maybe not even that far. It's a
Right.
tiny country. A few hours drive and you're basically across the country. But Maribor is considered to be the capital of Eastern Slovenia. It's the largest city in that part of the country. It's very connected to Austria. It's very close to the Austrian border. And we started there just to look at some of the attractions of that city.
You say very close to the Austrian border, which is of course true, but also very close to the Hungarian border, and also very
Yes.
close to the Croatian border.
Okay, Chris.
You're what, less than 20 miles from Croatia,
Just
and maybe a little more than that from Hungary.
Yeah, just to give listeners an idea of how big Slovenia is, American listeners might consider the state of New Jersey. It's approximately the same size.
Mhm.
Listeners in the UK might consider Wales. It's almost identical to the size of Wales. So that's the
Okay.
size that we're talking about here.
Excellent. So, and what are we going to do in Maribor?
Maribor is a student town. It's very lively. It's got a lot of things to do in the evening. It's got a really beautiful, just renovated, or now in the process of renovating, Central Square. You can walk from restaurant to cafe to club. It's very relaxing. It sits on the Drava River, which is a major waterway in that part of Slovenia. And the city, in fact, straddles the Drava. There are several bridges that cross the Drava, and the Drava is kind of recreational area in itself. People go boating in the Drava, canoeing. They can do stand-up paddle boarding. There's a couple of resorts along the river that are not far from Maribor that you can visit. There's a very interesting glamping possibility. Glamping is like camping, but it's in a relatively nice area. Think about very high level bungalows or something like that. That's what you would think. And that's about
I think of yurts for some reason, because that's been sold to me a lot recently when you talk about glamping. But
no, much more glamour in these than you'd find in a
got
yurt.
it. Okay.
And then in terms
Well, and I'm seeing pictures of an obviously medieval city. Seems to have either been very well reconstructed or largely preserved from the Middle
Yes.
Ages, with the red roofs and the stone buildings and
It's yes, the roots of Maribor go back centuries, but in
Mhm.
terms of the written word, in fact, in some of the buildings that you see, the churches, for example, the synagogue, go back to the 13th and 14th centuries, and those buildings are still standing. In fact, they do have one oldest in the world claim to fame, and that's the oldest surviving vine leaf or vine branch that you can visit. It's called the Old Vine House. There was the blight that came through Europe and destroyed the wine,
phylloxera.
the vines. Yes, exactly. This vine survived that and is still continually growing from there. And they actually make wine from it. Not very much wine, maybe 20 bottles a year, something like that. But you can go there. Slovenia has a very sophisticated wine tradition. People outside Slovenia might not realize that they don't export a lot of their wine, so it's not that well known. But the wines in Slovenia, both the whites and the reds, are delicious. The wine from this particular old vine is not particularly delicious, but it is interesting to be drinking wine from the oldest vine in the world.
Interesting. Now, if
So,
I were in Georgia, would they agree with that definition?
yes, I'm not saying this is the place where wine was invented, but it is one
Right.
place where one of these wine vines survived this thing.
Okay.
No, people in Georgia would fight tooth and nail. This is where wine was invented, or Armenia,
Right.
something like that, probably. I'm not trying to lay that claim for Slovenia, believe me.
Got it.
Don't worry about it. If you're over in that part of Slovenia, one other city that you really got to visit is Ptui. It's spelled
Okay.
Ptui. It's a very old city, ancient city, older perhaps than Maribor. I'm sure it is. And they say that it's the oldest city in Slovenia. But it came to us in the written record through the Roman times. It was a Roman garrison town. It was called Poetovio.
Hmm.
Poetovia. And the people in Ptui are very proud of this Roman tradition. At one point, they had thousands of Roman soldiers and citizens living there. One guy in Ptui told me at that point in time, it was larger than London, that kind of thing, local joke, more or less. But it's very interesting because the Roman military drew its soldiers from all around the empire at that time. To bring the soldiers in, you had quite a lot of diversity, a lot of cultural, ethnic, and even racial diversity among the Roman soldiers that were garrisoned at that time. And they brought a lot of religious diversity. So they have this Mithraism, this
Sure.
tradition of this old pre-Christian cult that was practiced by some of the Roman garrison soldiers, some of the Roman legions.
Pre and concurrent with. It didn't go
Yes,
away when, yeah.
yeah, no, you're right. But they've done a lot of digs, of course, in the area, and they've recovered a lot of these surviving ultras, these Mitra thrones or Mitra. I don't know how you would describe it, actually. I guess you could say an altar at some
Hmm.
point. And that whole cult is built around worshiping the sun. It's a very interesting cult. I'm not saying that people are into it in Batui at all, but they are certainly aware of it. And when you go there, you can see the precursors to Christianity or the competitors to Christianity at the time when the Roman Empire was adopting Christianity as its religion, so to speak.
It was more popular, as I recall, too, with the soldiers. It was a little less peaceful than Christianity, and it was quite an alternative. And I
Yes.
recall the sacred slaughtering of a bull in Mithridates, but I don't remember a
Yes.
lot of the details. Yeah.
Yes, I think you're right about that. I'm not a practicing Mitraist myself,
I understand.
and by no means an expert on this. I'm just trying
It's
to
so
draw,
hard to find a service for one thing.
just drawing the listeners to your attention that there are some very interesting and weird things in Batu. The things that you
Right.
just blow your mind when you go there. And it's a weird city. I use that word in a complimentary fashion. They have a lot of traditions. They have a carnival season that is very popular. It takes place during traditional carnival season, and it's called the Current Festival, and people dress up at these kind of giant fur-covered monsters. It's really
Okay.
frightening in a sense. They come out. It's really all done to scare the kids in town, more or less, but it harks back to, again, one of these really long ancient traditions of celebrating in Patui, not necessarily tied up with Mithraism or anything like that, but something different. But it just gives you an overlay of the cultural diversity that you find in a relatively small Slovenian city. And the
Hmm.
city itself is
Interesting.
lovely. It's got your typical parade of Gothic buildings, surviving Gothic architecture and Baroque architecture on top of it. It's got a huge castle on top of the city that overlooks down. You can see those red roofs, and it's also on the Drava. So if you would
Okay.
like to connect a visit to Maribor to Ptui, you can simply rent a bike, say in Maribor, or rent a bike in Ptui, and then ride down the riverbank because it's all cycling trails along the banks of the river. In fact, it's marked cycling trails. It's about 30 or 40 kilometers at a leisurely pace. It'll take you 2 or 3 hours to make that ride, and you can connect both of those cities. It makes a great trip. Overnight in one, rent bikes for a couple of days, go up to see the other one, come back, maybe stay the night in the other place, come back the next day. It's fantastic.
And as you say that, I of course remembered what the other time you were on Amateur Traveler was, and it was talking about a Danube River cruise. So
Oh, of
apparently, this
course. Okay.
along the river is going to be a theme as we talk.
Okay. So we've gone from the Danube to the Volga, now the Drava. Okay. You know, going slightly down in terms of length.
Anything else we want to see in Patui?
I think the best thing about Patui is ramble around, take
Hmm.
in some of that surviving Roman stuff, go visit the castle. Right off to the stables of the castle, the former stables of the castle, they have a permanent exhibition of the costumes that people wear during this carnival, this current festival that takes place in February. most years, and you can see the costumes even if you're not there for the festival itself. You can get an idea of it, and it's fantastic. It's great for kids. It's really scary stuff. Some of these costumes.
All right. Very cool. Where to next?
Okay, that was Eastern Slovenia, and we're not doing it justice just by talking about these few things. Like you can go skiing there. There's a lot of hiking there. In Patui, they have a thermal bath that is there that is quite nice. A place where you can do a spa treatment, go swimming. There's a water pool for kids, several water pools for kids. It's almost a water park, although when you run a spa, you don't call it a water park, but a spa by another name might be. Don't tell them I said that. But it's very nice. You can really do a lot of different activities: cycling, water, when the canoeing in the river. You can do the spa, you can do the hiking. It's really nice. But this thing, I think this next thing we're going to talk about is something that it's just completely unexpected. On this trip, all right, like I told you, I was a guest of the tourist board and going around different places. And on our itinerary one day, I see that we're going to visit a lead mine, a lead and zinc mine, a former one. So it's not operational right now, but it operated for many centuries, in fact, and it really operated at its highest level during the 19th and 20th centuries. So it's still quite recent. You can almost smell the miners, whatever, the lead in the air. Not too much. It's safe. You don't breathe very much lead, I hope, when you go
Very
in
much.
there. I have no idea. I did ask if it was safe. They said, don't worry about anything like that. Yeah, so it was on the itinerary. It's not an easy drive to get to Koroška. This is where we started the conversation, in this small province in the middle of basically nowhere in Slovenia. It takes a good 3 hours to drive from Maribor, 3-4 hours, something like that, because the country itself is small, but of course it's very hilly. So you're driving up hills and down hills, up hills and down hills. You can't drive very quickly. So it does take a while to get there. The town you want to shoot for is called Mezica. Mezica, Mezica. And so we were driving there. I was talking to my guide. What are we going to do there? And he was looking at me and he's, you'll see when we get there. So I was thinking, of course, we would take a tour of the mine. Maybe we'd take a train ride through the mine or something like that. And we would just look at some displays, some exhibitions about miners' life or something like that, which would be fine. Nice, relaxing day. When we got there, we sat down at the mine and we talked to the people there. And they told me a little bit of background, like what I told you. It's been worked for hundreds of years. It was particularly worked in the 19th and 20th centuries very hard during the war, of course. In fact, it was worked through Tito's Yugoslavia. It was just stilled in the 1990s. But they were thinking, what are we going to do with this lead mine? And so what they've done is they've opened it up for exploration, but not exploration on foot or on a train or anything, but exploration by mountain bike. So you're actually mountain biking through a lead mine.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
I
I
did
know
not
that
see that
sounds.
coming.
Well, I didn't see it coming either, to be honest. I was sitting there on the bench and the guys wheeled over some mountain bikes and I was looking at that. I was like, what's that for? And it's, you'll see. So they loaded up the bikes in a van. And then from the beginning of the mine, you go toward another opening of the mine where it's better for bike riding, basically. We got out of the van, we got on the bikes, and we adjusted helmet and everything, helmet and seat height and all that stuff. And then they attach, of course, a miner's light to the helmet because you're going to need some light when you go in there. It's completely dark. So we go to the entrance of the mine, open up the door, and it's, of course, a blast of cold air. The mine rarely gets above 50 degrees Fahrenheit down there. In fact, never does. And then you take a couple of pedals to get your bearings, to get your eyes acclimated to the lack of light down there. And then basically you're off. You know, you're following the leader and you're cycling. You don't go that fast. It's set up for, I would say, not quite beginner, but intermediate level. You don't have to be a great cyclist to enjoy this. It's not dangerous. I'll tell you about something that if you're really into mountain biking, you really ride at a high skill level, then there's an option for you here. But just to talk about how most people will explore the mine on bike. You get out, the road is relatively flat. It's a little bit rocky, hence the mountain bike. You couldn't do a road bike through there, I don't think. The walls are very narrow, as you can imagine, and you're really ducking your head as you're going through. You're riding. You have a little bit of space on either side, maybe a couple of feet. So there's a little bit of wiggle room for mistakes. You don't want to go careening into the wall. And you ride about, 300, 400 feet. And then you stop, and then the leader of the tour will get off the bike and put your bike on the of the mine, and then you walk around a little bit, and he'll show you different things, like different minerals that are still found in the mine, like calcite or wolfenite, which is more rare. There's still some miners' equipment down there. They show you some canyons down there, and you really get a sense of, where you try to get a sense of what it was really like to work down there as a miner. Thank God, that I'm not doing it. I'm sure you feel the same way. It was a very difficult
Yeah.
life down there. Those guys had a tough life. And then I think the whole stretch we went would be about 3 or 4 miles, maybe 5 or 6 kilometers, something like that. And you're out of the mine in about 2 hours of cycling, maybe an hour and a half, 90 minutes to 2 hours, something like that, with a few stops in between. But it's a very interesting way to approach a mine on a bicycle. It's crazy,
Right.
really. And then there is a section of the mine that is much hillier, much rockier, much more challenging. And so some guys that are really into mountain biking there decided to create a very high level mountain biking trail. They called it Black Hole. And one of my guides, one of my buddies on the trip, he, a very skilled mountain biker, much better than I am, he went up and did a couple of the segments of the tour, and it was incredible, really. You're ripping around a mine at very high speeds. You need to be very skilled to do it. And they have races down there occasionally, not very often. If you can imagine a mountain biking race in a mine, it's just pretty insane. So I thought that was my day. Okay. So we went out of the mine. We got back in the van. We went, or no, actually, you cycle back to the entrance, so we don't even get back in the van. We went back to the beginning of the mine. And so I was like, okay, what next? And he said, we're going back in the mine. And the director of the mine came over, and a very nice woman who runs the whole complex over there. And she said, this time we're going to take a train and you're going to go canoeing at the bottom of the mine. And I thought, oh, okay, that's weird. Okay, let's do that. In my mind, I thought we're going to get on a choo-choo train. We're going to sit there in seats, and we're going to have a view out the window. And we're going to go into the mine, and then there's going to be a lake there, and we're going to get off and get on a boat and go paddle around a little bit, and then get back on the train and come out. No, I had nothing like that at all. You get into a real miner's train, which is to say a box. No windows. It's a box the size of a basic Amazon cardboard box. And you're in there like this, crouched. They used to get 8 miners into one of these small train cars, but there was only 3 of us in this one, and it already felt a little uncomfortable. Like, I can't imagine how they would get 8 guys in there. They would just have to get in, make themselves into balls. So the train takes about 20 or 25 minutes to go down there. There's no windows. You're lurching, but you feel every clack of the track as you're going down there. You go down into the mine.
And from the pictures I'm seeing, when you talk about small, I'm seeing grown men standing alongside it, taller than the train car.
Yes, yeah,
so
you are
from
taller.
the rails all the way up to the top of the car, which of course you don't get to sit all of that. So you're in a 4-foot tall space or something like that.
Yes,
maybe.
I would say it's probably, the train itself is about 5 feet or maybe 6 feet, and then 1 meter wide. So that's the space that we're looking at, maybe 2 by 1 meter. Incredible. But they close the door, slam the door. Of course, you cannot open the door because it goes through very narrow passages. You don't want to stick your hand out or your head out or anything like that. So you're chugging along. You go into the mine about 3 kilometers, so 2 miles, something like that, into the hill. And then you get out of the mine. It's actually pretty airy when you get out. I would not recommend this for claustrophobic people. And I thought before this that I was mildly claustrophobic, but I found out that I can actually do this. But if you have serious problems with claustrophobia, it's going to be over by the time you get into that little train. But you get into the mountain, there's actually a little bit of headspace in there, 2 meters tall or something like that. You can walk around. It's quite comfortable. You can breathe. The air is good down there. So from the train, where the train leaves you off in the darkness, you walk around a little bit, I don't know, 50 feet or something like that. And then you go to a changing room in which you change into waders, which are these rubber, neoprene or whatever the material is, things that cover you up into the chest, basically, and then with the shoulder suspenders. And that allows you to wade in the water without getting hypothermia or something like that, because the water temperature is about somewhere in the 40s. It's not very high above freezing down there. 6 degrees Celsius, whatever that works out to be, 50 degrees, something like that. So you get into your waders and you get all ready for that. And then you climb down about 600 steps from there into the mine. So by the time you're down there, you are down at a depth of around 1 kilometer below the ground. So think about standing on the ground and thinking about how deep it would be to be 1 kilometer. So 800 meters or something. 1,000 meters, but 800, I don't know what I'm trying to say, or maybe 7/10 of a mile, something like that, which is 6/10 of a mile. So anyway, you're climbing down. It's relatively safe. The steps are not wet. They're a little bit wet, but the steps are iron. So the water, you don't slip, although you're wearing those wader boots. You're not wearing your own shoes. So you're really thinking about one slip and I'm done for. But you can hold on. There's a railing there. So you take it one step at a time down to this depth of about, 800 meters, a kilometer below the ground. And then you get out and you get your kayak and then you get into the water so you're used to it. You can't feel the temperature of the water through the waders, really. It doesn't feel that cold. And then you wade your kayak into the groundwater, way down deep there, and then you get into the boat. Try to get into the boat. You don't want to fall into the water because how would they get you out of there? And then you, with your helmet lights on, you have your miner's lights on, and it's a little bit lit down there. And the water is a beautiful blue-green. It's so quiet. The air is very fresh. The water feels cold, but completely refreshing because you're perspiring from that long climb down. You're just ready to do that. You even think as you're sitting in the boat, oh my God, wouldn't it be wonderful just to dive into the water and feel it all around you? And then you think, no, don't do that. So they leave you down there for about 45 minutes. You can paddle around wherever you'd like in the mine. The water doesn't go that far. You can't really get yourself into that much trouble. You can paddle around a bit through very narrow chambers. The formations down there are fantastic.
And very narrow, as in I'm seeing people ducking to get into some of these chambers. Yeah. Okay.
Yes. You definitely have to duck some of the times, but you're wearing a helmet. You're not really in any danger. You're much more secure than you'd think. And of course, your survival instinct takes over. You're not going to ever allow yourself to tip your canoe. That would be bad news. And it's just amazing. It's just beautiful. It's completely peaceful. It's a very restorative sense. For travelers who have a sense of weird adventure, who want to try something that you might not ever find anywhere else in the world, relatively fit, 600 steps is no picnic. Going down, but then think about coming back up. You're also walking more or less the same distance, but this time you're wet in your waders, so you even have a little bit more of water weight on you when you're climbing. And you hike up those steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way up 500 steps or something like that. And then you're back in the changing room. You get back into your street clothes, and then you make your way back to the train again. And then you get back into that crazy train. And then 20 or 25 minutes later, you're back above ground again. And you're like, wow, did I just do that? Would I do that again?
And apparently that when they were mining this, they were, of course, pumping out the water. And so you could have gone further down. But when they stopped mining, they stopped pumping out the water. And this is now the natural water level.
Absolutely. Yes, exactly.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's how it's explained to me as well. The water is very clean. It's very pure. The place is isolated. And with the train, just by getting in that train and then going way, way down there, with all those steps and everything, I don't want to exaggerate this. I don't think you could ever put yourself in the place of an actual miner down there, but you definitely develop an appreciation of what those guys did every day to go to work.
Sure. Yeah.
And what they did every day to come home.
And apparently if families want to do it, there is a minimum age of 10 years old, I'm seeing.
Yeah. That might even...
height of 1.5 meters.
Yes. Yeah. I asked the guy what guidelines for parents would be. I think the mountain biking thing, for a reasonably good 10-year-old cyclist, he could do that mine, no problem. I would say wait a couple of years before you do the canoeing. I would say 12 or even 14, just because the height thing has to do with the waders, because the waders are sized, even a medium-sized wader is designed for a man who's 5'10" or 6 foot, something like that. Yeah. If you're 12 years old and don't have the height, you're going to be falling out of your waders or not comfortable in them. That would be a problem.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. Okay.
Ah bon chien. Bonjour, je suis Theo, a tour leader with Explore, and this is Punti. He's helping us find truffles under the trees next to this beautiful vineyard. Maybe for tomorrow's cooking class? Oui, call is 7h. Parfait. 7:00. Not everyone gets to enjoy a Bordeaux sunset this way, but you will if you explore. No, Punti. Search exploreworldwide.com and don't just travel, explore.
Don't miss out on the last few weeks of football action with Prize Picks. the best place to win cash while watching the playoffs. The app is simple. Pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. Download the PrizePicks Daily Fantasy Sports app today and use code FIELD and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code FIELD on PrizePicks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game. Must be present in certain states. Visit prizepicks.com for restrictions and details.
Highly, if you can find your way to Mierzwice, there are not many public transportation options. There is a bus that goes there from Ljubljana, but it takes a few hours and you really have to plan it. If you would ever want to go there and overnight, because I told you about this black hole, this mountain biking, this very skillful mountain biking element that's part of the mine inside, that whole area is a mountain biking mecca for Slovenia. It's like the area, for the whole country of mountain biking. And in that sense, it's like Moab or something like that for Slovenia. And there are some hotels in that area that I stayed at the Koroš Eco Hotel there. And it's very nice. You don't necessarily have to be a cyclist to stay there. Of course, it helps if you are. But it is one option to stay relatively close to the mine overnight so you don't have to get there and back in one day. It is possible to find a place to stay the night. And the people who run it are extremely friendly. They offer shelter. They offer shelter. They run shuttles. They offer shelter. That's their.
Well, that's good. That's good for a hotel. I find that helpful.
My God, it's been a long time since it's been almost pre-COVID since I've done a podcast interview. So you have to excuse me. But they're really nice. They're connected together in some way. And they run shuttles to the mine, and then we'll pick you up and take you back to the hotel, too. There is that possibility if you want to connect it to something like that.
It's funny to me how so many of the memorable experiences that I had in Western Croatia were also underground. So you have Croatia.
In Slovenia?
Slovenia. Apparently, it's been a long time since I've done a podcast interview. Also. You mentioned the caves. Some of the caves in Western Slovenia are just stunning.
Right.
Just
yes.
really stunning.
Yes.
And then also I did a mercury mine tour in
yes.
Ilria, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. You could do a whole just tour Slovenia underground.
Yes. I've never done that mercury tour, but when I tell people about this lead mine tour, people who know Slovenia well will mention that tour. I don't know. I don't think it has the same. It's
No,
not.
it's
You
not.
don't do mountain
all
biking
on
down
foot.
there. Hiking. Yeah. Okay. On foot. Yeah. Exactly. You wouldn't think that because lead and mercury are such dangerous metals.
Right.
You wouldn't think that would be a good idea at all. But these mines have been closed for a while. Of course, Slovenians themselves are very aware of environmental protection, environmental preservation. I don't think that they would subject you to anything that was truly dangerous to your
And now
short-term
with
visit.
being part of the EU, there are strict regulations in terms
Yes,
of
right.
safety and things like that. So
While you're on that tour at the lead mine, they will tell you about how the lead mine affected the health of people who work the mines and people who lived in that area over the centuries. And it obviously, those are extremely dangerous professions.
And I know when I was in the mercury mine tour, they said, obviously mercury is, again, very dangerous chemical, but it was all of the mining risks that were the real problem. It was the explosions and things like that, and cave-ins and flooding and all of the things that miners put up with or succumb to. Interesting. Which is why so many of these actually were closed. Some of them were closed when they joined the EU. Basically, when a lot of the EU laws started applying, they're like, yeah, no.
I think
for one thing, mercury is now banned in the EU, so I don't know what the lead regulations are, but I'm sure they're stricter than I'm used to here in the US.
I do know that in order to help that region, the region is surprisingly, for a country like Slovenia, which is relatively prosperous, you don't see any poverty. You don't really see any people seem to live relatively good life everywhere. This area, Kroško, is relatively depressed because of the fact that the mines were all shut down. So you actually do see a part of a prosperous country that is not doing as well. In order to help that region make the transition away from real mining, they've put, I think it's a battery production plant there that uses zinc. It's a related technology. It's hopefully a cleaner technology, but it gives people there a job, and it obviously gives people batteries, which they need.
Which is also pretty important these days.
Which is important these days, exactly.
Anything else we want to do in that region?
I don't think so. It's, at least I didn't. You know, now the Slovenia Tourist Board told me about another mine, a coal mine that's located not far from there, south of there, in which you can go and have a gourmet dinner inside.
Just like the
Unfortunately,
miners did.
yeah. I don't know. I think they want to get people acquainted with the industrial history in a unique way, and the only way
Which
they're going
I
to.
find fascinating. If you've had a chance to do this sort of thing here, or I think you and I both did Ostrava up in
Right,
Czech Republic, and again, the industrial history there, I think it's just fascinating seeing
right.
some of this.
They're trying to turn a lemon into lemonade, basically, and
Mhm.
and the only way you can get a person to go into a coal mine these days is to offer them the prospect of a gourmet meal, apparently. But I didn't get to do that, so I can't really speak to it. But I'm told that it's highly desirable, highly recommended.
Got it. I see that there is a coal mining museum of Slovenia in Koroška, too.
In Koroška, south, that's the place where
yeah.
that's the place where you have the meal too. They do that.
Got it.
I
Okay.
think for all these things, and I should say this, Chris, if you want to do the mine, you have to go onto the mine website. You have to book it and all that stuff. You
Yeah.
can't just show up in Midgets and say, let's go canoeing or
Okay.
let's go kayaking. It's something that you really have to plan out. Although I think you can plan it. It's not like people are pushing there. It's not like crowds are lining up to do this. So it is possible.
And I see in the pictures of the Coal Mining Museum of Slovenia, it looks very similar to the Coal Mining Museum that I went to in Ostrava, up in the Czech Republic, or Czechia, if I'm
right.
supposed to call it that these days, with all the clothes hanging there because you changed your clothes into your mining outfit because coal mining is a dirty business.
Yeah, exactly.
And so
You don't want to bring it
you know,
home.
You didn't want to bring it home, exactly. So similar sort of setup. It looks like, although there you weren't allowed to go down into the mine; it was sealed.
Is that right?
So it's interesting that you can do it here. I suspect they're not taking you to the deepest levels potentially, but
Believe me, I've been deep enough. I know where the deepest levels are.
fascinating. Anything else we want to add to this itinerary here of Eastern Slovenia?
They also took me to a couple of western parts of Slovenia, and I'll just mention
Okay,
to it a
sure.
couple of minutes here. We
But
went from
lesser
there.
visited still.
Yes, it's not Lake Bled, but it is another lake that's very close to Lake Bled called Lake Bohin. It's a
Sure, yeah.
beautiful lake. It's, I think, larger than Bled in terms of land area. It's within a national park. It's within the Triglav National Park in northwestern Slovenia. So that restricts the amount of commercial development that can take place on the lake. It will never become as crowded as Lake Bled because there's simply not the facilities there to handle the number of visitors. That said, it's a beautiful lake. It's a very peaceful lake. You can do hiking, and it's a kind of center of adventure tourism. You can do a lot of rafting in the area. You can climb Mount Triglav. But one thing that I did that I had always wanted to do and never really thought about it seriously, but I went horseback riding in Bohin. They have a horse farm there. They run Icelandic horses, which are smaller horses, very sturdy. They're not good for young children. They're still a little bit too high. But from a teenager on up, of course, the Icelandic horses are an excellent size. Even if you do somehow get thrown off your horse, which is highly unlikely, it's not that far to the ground as with a larger horse. But the thing with Icelandic horses, they're very good climbers, and you can go up on the trails a bit. Obviously, you're not climbing mountains, but you're going up into the hills. It gives you those beautiful horseback views of Lake Bohin in the distance, and it's just a really lovely, peaceful trip. We went out on a 2-hour ride into the hills around Lake Bohin on these Icelandic horses, and I really recommend it. For anybody who goes out there, it's a perfect family trip. It's a lot of fun, even if you're a travel writer like me, just hanging around. It's a completely way to refresh yourself and really the fun parts of the job, because I had a blast. I really did.
If you are a horse fan, then you could potentially also include the Libzauner stallions a little further west
That's true.
from there because
Yes,
they come from
that's true.
Slovenia.
Yes.
Although we talk about the Spanish riding school and you can see them in Vienna, they're really from Slovenia. So.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I know. That's a historic wrong that we must right with this podcast.
Except
Yeah,
you said
no,
two other places they took you to.
Lake Bohin was the main one, and then just a little bit in Ljubljana, which is, of course, is a great capital city, a small capital
Right.
city, a couple of 100,000 people. Also straddles a body of water, very small and narrow river, but beautiful green water. If
With
you're
the
going to
castle
Slovenia,
on the top.
with a castle high on the top, which you can climb up to, or you can take a funicular. So if you're planning a trip to Slovenia and you're going to these eastern parts like Maribor or Ptuj or heaven forbid going to go canoeing in the lead mine, you would also really want to spend a couple of days in Ljubljana as well, either on the in or the out, just to enjoy that very livable, very nice city.
Right. Although we should say, so the episode before this, we were in Austria and we got as far south as Graz, and that is closer to Maribor than Ljubljana is.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
because we are so close there too, you're probably just as close or maybe even closer to Zagreb in Croatia as well. So,
Yes.
easy to add part of this to an Austria or Croatia.
Yes. There are trains and buses that go from Graz to Maribor to
Yeah.
Zagreb. That's a line that you can easily go down if you're going to Croatia. That's a good point.
So I'd like to defend my misspeaking here of Slovenia as Croatia. I was close. Although I'm sure I would offend a lot of Slovenians that way. But
well, they have good relations with Croatia sometimes. Yeah. I mean, they're a little bit rivalrous, I would say, if I can use that word.
Excellent. Mark, anything else we want to add to our itinerary, or shall we do some of our wrap-up questions?
I think we can wrap up. It was a great trip. I really highly recommend it. And the country is small enough that you can do some of those big ticket items like the caves that you talked about, or Lake Bled or Lake Bohinj, and tack on a trip to Eastern Slovenia, Maribor, go hiking in the hills out there, which are very beautiful, and Tui and other.
And I'll put a link to the previous episode we've done on. Actually, we've done I think 3 other episodes on Slovenia, but the trip that I took there, I thoroughly enjoyed Slovenia and highly recommend it for people. Right. It is a gorgeous country.
Right? Yeah, it is.
Excellent. You are standing in the prettiest spot in Eastern Slovenia that you've seen.
In Eastern Slovenia,
Where are you standing?
Spot.
What are you looking at?
In Eastern Slovenia. The prettiest spot. It's Slovenia, so it's a natural wonder. So I don't think it's the prettiest necessarily, but it's very impressive. How's that? Would that do? It's a long run of hills. It goes on for miles, like 50 miles. It's just a hill. It's a huge green hill. It's called Pohore, and it's very symbolically important to Eastern Slovenia. So Pohorje, I believe. Yeah, exactly. It has ski resorts on it. It has hiking trails on it. It has peat bogs. I went hiking on the top of, or not on the top, but around the things. And we looked at some very rare peat bogs, alpine peat bogs that were there. And it was just very, very beautiful. It's just beautiful valleys. If you can imagine, tree forested valleys and green hills everywhere you look.
Excellent. If I had said Western Slovenia, what would you have said? You were thrown there a little bit. That's what you.
Oh no! The most beautiful thing is staring into the Socha River with that electric blue-green water in the Triglav National Park. That that river where you go rafting. It's in the Julian Alps. You just never ever saw real water that was that color before. So
excellent. One thing that makes you laugh and say only in Slovenia.
Oh, Slovenians. I hope no Slovenians are listening. And if they are, I'm giving you a big podcast hug here. Slovenians are very proud of their sustainability. The fact that they only use locally sourced products, that the cow is from Slovenia, that the cheese comes from the cow, that the milk comes from the cow, the eggs come from the chickens that are standing right over there. That kind of thing. It's very important to them. It must be built into their culture, which is great, because we're all moving in that direction in tourism, the whole industry. But people can take that to an extreme. So you can get into a conversation with somebody who's telling you about where this is sourced, where that is sourced, where this is sourced, so that kind of thing. And it's just, I'm always cracking up at this when I hear this, because it's fantastic, but sometimes they don't know when to stop somehow.
Excellent. And if you had to summarize Eastern Slovenia in just 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
Green.
All right.
Wine. Didn't talk too much about the wine there, but
we'll have to talk a little more about that here in a second. Okay.
Okay. That's the largest wine growing region of the country. It's actually in Eastern Slovenia. Okay. Let me think now. For the last one, I think it might be Red Roof in a sense, because both Ptuj and Maribor you can recognize them on pictures simply by the color of their buildings. Very distinctive.
You mentioned wine. So if we wanted to experience the wine region in Slovenia, a couple questions. Where is it based? Where's the center of that?
I would say Maribor is the center of
Okay.
that. And you can
Excellent.
go off, and within 10 miles of Maribor, you'll be at 10 different wineries.
And how well are they set up for people dropping in and tasting? Is that something that happens in Eastern Slovenia?
Yeah, it's a good question because obviously in California and the Western United
Yeah.
States, it's a completely different culture. You just pull up, park in the car, go in. They're set up
Well,
for
these
guests
days
and
you
everything.
make a reservation.
You can
but
make a
yes.
reservation, yeah. There, I would say you can't just drop in. I'm sure
Yeah.
there are a few that you can just drop into, but it's better to get some names and recommendations, go on the web, and then send an email and say that what you're interested in tasting the wines. And many places do have a restaurant or at least a place where they can have snacks, so you're more than likely to get a meal with that, and then they'll do a tasting, and then you just buy a tasting, basically. It might be 50 euros or 100 euros. It might include food. It might be for one or two people, something like that. But highly recommended. It's just a fantastic experience, and the wines are delicious. They really are.
Excellent. Our guest again has been Mark Baker. I mentioned markbakerprague.com. Now, Mark, are we going to find an article on your website about this, or where are we going to find your writings on this?
Yes, these articles will be published on the web through Lonely Planet because I was working with Lonely Planet for the articles. They haven't published them yet, so as we're recording in early August, so I suspect that they should be available online under just Google Lonely Planet Slovenia and my name, and you'll find those articles in a couple of weeks within.
These are violent criminals, so they're not going to go down easy.
ABC Tuesdays.
Let's get this done.
The Rookie is back.
We have 2 new rookies starting today.
Howdy.
Being a cop is stressful 24/7. Every year on the job is different.
And Training Day
We have a serial killer at large.
never ends.
We need an ambulance!
The Rookie. All new Tuesdays on ABC and stream on Hulu.
But then once they go live on the web, then I will then put them on my own website too. I don't want to put them on my website first before they put them on the web.
And if you tell me when they're up, I'll link to them from the show notes here so
Super,
that people
I
can
will.
more
I'll
easily find them.
I'll send you the link for sure.
Excellent. And we should say that Mark does regular work, including guidebook work for Lonely Planet. How many guidebooks have you worked on, Mark?
I think I've been doing it now since 2008. So probably north of 20 to 30 guidebooks. It's not
Eastern Europe or all.
Yeah,
Eastern
almost
Europe.
all, with
Or
the
Central
exception
Europe, sorry.
Central and Eastern Europe, because
Yeah.
I've done writing on Russia as well for Lonely Planet with that Volga trip. And then one guide on Minnesota and Wisconsin for Lonely Planet, if you can believe
did
that.
not know that. Okay.
You might be able to relate to that somehow.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Mark, thanks so much for coming on the show and for telling us of your love for Slovenia.
Oh, it was my pleasure. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Special thanks go out to the patrons of the show who help support Amateur Traveler financially. As I said last week, if you're listening to the show for the first time, don't bother becoming a patron yet. Let's listen to some shows, go on some trips, see if it's of any value to you. But if you have gone on some trips and it has been of some value, then think about supporting the show through patreon.com/amateurtraveler. On the recent episode we did on London, I heard from Stephanie who said, "Great episode. I've been to London 6 times and I'm going back in September. I still found some new things to check out when I go. However, one thing she said, I'd like to make a suggestion. Using a debit card versus getting an Oyster card. You have to have a contactless debit card, and you have to make sure it doesn't charge you foreign transaction fees. My card is not contactless, and I did get hit with foreign transaction fees every time I use it, so I will continue to use an Oyster card when I go. All the best, Stephanie." Stephanie, very good comment there. And I forget that a lot of people don't even know that there are such thing as foreign transaction fees, and you might want to check whether your credit card has them before you travel out of the country, not just to London, but any place else. And getting a card without foreign transaction fees makes it easier to use when you're traveling. With that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And thanks so much for listening.